14-year-old Issac Jackson, gunned down this week in a fatal spray of drive-by bullets.
I was born in it.
You were born a gang member? What's the name of this gang?
Mafia insane.
What do you do?
Gang bang.
Welcome to Boys in the Hood TV. Today we're tapping into the streets of Chicago, and today we're going to be talking about a group of vice lords who shot and killed a 14-year-old teen in 1995, only to be gunned down 20 years later after being paroled from prison. Now, the vice lords are one of the oldest and known black gangs throughout the city of Chicago, and one of the second largest under the People Nation Alliance. Now, there are different types of vice lords, like conservative vice lords, unknown vice lords, insane, mafia insane, traveling vice lords, and a few others. Now, similar to the Crips or Bloods in LA, not every vice lord gets along, and this has been taking place in Chicago since the early 80s. Now, the vice lords have been responsible for many murders, drugs, kidnapping, burglary, and all sorts of violent crimes throughout the city of Chicago. But in 1995, a group of vice lords from the Austin neighborhood would take the life of a teenager. Issac Jackson, only 14 years old, was a freshman at Marshall High School who loved playing basketball with his friends. On January 30th, 1995, Issac went to visit his girlfriend who lived only a few blocks away from his house. Now, Issac lived in a mafia insane area on the 4900 block of Adams Street. Although he lived in this area, he was not a gang member. At around 11 p.m., Issac Jackson was leaving his girlfriend's house and was walking near Cicero Ave and Adams Street. Now, Issac's home was only a few doors down, but not far from Issac was a group of vice lords cruising the block in a four-door sedan. 17-year-old Regine Jackson from the unknown vice lords, 20-year-old Damian Williamson, who's from CVL, and also 17-year-old John Worship from the CVLs. Now, as Issac walked down Adams Street, headed to his house, the vice lords would spot him and slowly follow beside him. As they pulled up next to him, the group started to yell at Jackson, when suddenly Regine and Williamson pulled out straps and opened fire. Issac Jackson attempted to flee, but was struck in the hail of gunfire. He was hit over 20 times, with 8 shots being fatal as he fell to the ground. Bullets would not only strike Jackson, but 75-year-old Bernice Levette, who sat in her home as she watched TV. She would be hitting her chest and her elbow. Now, as 14-year-old Issac Jackson laid on the ground, taking his final breath, the vice lords would pull off. Police would shortly arrive on scene to find Jackson dead on the sidewalk.
14-year-old Issac Jackson, gunned down this week in a fatal spray of drive-by bullets on a city block where parents won't allow their children near a window.
Monday night, I couldn't go to sleep. They kept shooting all night.
And shoot somebody and shoot them 20, 23 times. I mean, what's going on?
When I first moved over here, I didn't have to worry about this. Now I got to watch my back and everything. I hate it.
Officers would also have 75-year-old Bernice transported to Mount Sinai Hospital, where she would survive her injuries. Now, only weeks later, all 3 men would be arrested for the murder. The police would ultimately determine that it was a case of mistaken identity. All 3 will be charged with murder, and by the end of their trials, all 3 will be found guilty. Now, 17-year-old Regine Jackson will be sentenced to 46 years in prison. Damian Williamson will be sentenced to 36 years in prison, which included the attempted murder of Bernice Levette. Now, John Worship would also be sentenced to 30 years in prison. But 20 years later, Regine Jackson will be released from prison, only serving half of his official term. And not too long after him, John Worship would also be released from prison, serving half of his term. Now, once released, Regine Jackson would start to turn his life around at the age of 37. He would, in fact, return back to his old neighborhood, but things would take a fatal turn only a year later. On July 17, 2016, at around 4 a.m., Regine would be on the 4500 block of Maypole Avenue, which is a known vice lord set. Now, Regine and an unknown man would get into an altercation, which would lead to a fight over the dice game. And as Regine turned his back, the man would pull out a gun and shoot him directly in the back of the head. The gunman would flee the scene, and when officers would arrive, Regine would be immediately transferred to the hospital, where he will be pronounced dead nearly 8 hours later. Now, 14-year-old Issac Jackson, who was killed 20 years ago, his family would comment on this murder. They would go on to say that if Regine Jackson would have never been released from prison, he would still be alive to this day. Now, this comment would anger Regine's family, but the murder of Regine Jackson would go completely unsolved because the gunman who was responsible for it was never found. Now, John Worship, the other vice lord who was paroled at around the same time as Regine, would also meet the same fate. Like Regine, Worship would move back into the block where he was from. Now, 6 months later, after Regine's death, on January 1st, 2017, Worship would be on the 4700 block of Monroe Street in the CVL hood. At around 5 a.m., Worship would get into a confrontation with another man who would then proceed to shoot him multiple times. Police would arrive on scene, and John Worship would be pronounced dead due to gunshot wounds. And just like Regine's murder, the gunman in Worship's murder was never arrested. Now, the only survivor out of these three vice lords that were responsible for the death of the teenager in 1995, Damon Williamson, is the only one still alive to this day. I would like to thank everybody for tapping in, and I'll see y'all next time.